Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 15th Izzy Award ceremony. It's a great privilege and honor for me to introduce this ceremony. And my name is Raza Rumi, and I'm the director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College. Our center is one of its kind nationally and internationally, as it expressly engages students with non-corporate newsrooms and new media spaces. Each year, the Park Center of Independent Media honors outstanding journalists and media outlets for their contributions in speaking truth to power and upholding the public interest. Our planet faces a variety of challenges that include extreme inequities, climate emergency, and mass-scale poverty that is driven by the greed and misdoings of the extremely powerful, who more often than not are unaccountable. In such times, uncovering truth and bringing facts to the public's awareness are not easy tasks. Following the legacy of I.F. Stone, awardees today are beacons of truth, democracy, and hope for an inclusive and equitable future for people living in the US and abroad. In a dangerous threat to democracy in the US and across the globe, the super rich have the power to funnel dark money into political organizations, funding advocacy groups, and building movements that are unchecked by the people affected by the policies they frame. This puts power into the deepest pockets, as these powerful political groups don't have to disclose the source of their money. This democratic backsliding is worsened and perhaps a contributor to the climate emergency that we are witnessing in our lifetime. Even so, mainstream media lags behind in reporting the dire, worsening outcomes of a warming planet, including deadly heat and extreme fires in the US, in the Western US fossil fuels, continue to wreak havoc on the planet, unchecked by corporate news channels. Climate change, civil conflict, and inequities are also leading to migrations of people across borders and within countries. And never has the world seen a larger number of displaced families. Their stories and lives remain on the margins as corporate media globally is obsessed with power games and the maneuvering of the elites, who in the first place are contributors for the disorder we find ourselves in. Decades of struggle to create a racially just society in the US are now threatened by the rise of dangerous ideologies and populist politics that use racial identities as a means to garner votes. This is why independent media and the legacy of icons such as Izzy Stone have become imperative for our times. But tonight you shall hear from amazing journalists on their journeys and passionate work and the challenges they had to contend with while bringing such vital stories on such issues to the public eye. And I would now request the Dean of Park School of Communications, Amy Faulkner, to make her welcome remarks, and then we shall start with the ceremony.
Thank you so much, Raza. I am just honored and thrilled to be here tonight. This is the 15th annual Izzy Award ceremony. So tonight we are celebrating outstanding achievement in independent media. Little background, the Izzy Award is named after maverick journalist I.F. Izzy Stone, who launched I.F. Stone's Weekly in 1953 and exposed government deception, McCarthyism, and racial bigotry. Since 2009, the award has recognized the outstanding work of independent outlets, journalists, or producers for contributions to culture, politics, or journalism created outside traditional corporate structures. The Park Center for Independent Media Studies is journalism-oriented media outlets that operate outside these corporate institutions. The center's mission is to engage media producers and students in dialogue and action about independent media, especially US-based outlets producing content on issues such as equity, social justice, and sustainability. The Park School of Communications blends liberal arts with professional, theoretical, and practical studies, engaging communication in its many forms to create lifelong learners. Our students gain critical experience in and out of the classroom toward diverse roles as professionals in media fields. And through internships, thought-provoking talks with independent media makers, and more, the Park Center for Independent Media offers crucial opportunities to engage and develop independent media. Rampant concentration of U.S. media ownership has led to a growing independent media sector that is empowered to tackle today's most pressing issues. To address multiple economic, environmental, political, and social crises, it is critical to protect the free, independent, and viable media system that tonight's honorees represent. Enabling our students to help build a robust future for independent media is therefore an imperative for our communication schools. That's why I'm so proud to be here tonight. I can't wait to hear what everybody has to say, talk about these critical issues. I'm so happy our students are here. All of you are here tonight to listen and to learn. So I welcome you all to tonight's session. I'm going to pass it back off to Raza.
Thank you so much, Amy, for a great intro and being a supporter of our center and, of course, the Izzy Award. By extension, I'll invite Jeff Cohen to introduce our first winner. And let me say a few words about Jeff. Jeff is a well-known American journalist, media critic, and he's also the founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, a great media watch body. And he was also the founding director of the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, where he worked for more than a decade. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Raza. When we launched the Izzy Award 15 years ago with the support of the Stone family, we wanted to honor exceptional journalists today who were walking in the same independent media path that I.F. Stone walked in from 1953 to 1971 with a 4-page newsletter. And I first learned about I.F. Stone's Weekly when I was a teenager at a massive anti-Vietnam War protest in Washington, D.C. And I remember marveling, how does this one journalist covering racism, covering Vietnam, covering government deception, political repression, how does he outreport the whole media establishment? And I've got to say that when I read The Lever, one of the Izzy Award winners, when I read it every day, I have that same marvel. As I mentioned, I didn't even learn about I.F. Stone's Weekly until 16 years after it launched. And it launched during the depths of the hysteria, the witch hunting, the Joe McCarthyite blacklisting. And I've been reading The Lever as a subscriber from day one. So I have a slightly different vantage point on The Lever, but I must say that it also puts the corporate media establishment to shame. It was said if you weren't reading Izzy Stone's newsletter in the 1950s and 60s, you weren't getting the news. Well, I believe if you're not reading The Lever, you're really not getting the full national news story today. As we Izzy Award judges said, no news outlet is as thorough and relentless as The Lever in exposing the corrupting influence of corporate power on government and both major parties. Whether The Lever is covering government deregulation and unsafe railroads, or covering Medicare privatization and the way Democratic leaders have obstructed healthcare reform, or the dark money financing of politicians. The Lever, which you can read at levernews.com, is on this anti-corruption beat every single day. It was founded by the 2015 Izzy Award winner, David Sirota. And it also covers political activism in resistance to corporate power, to greed, to racism. And the cherry on top of it all, the staff of The Lever is fully unionized. So accepting the award on behalf of The Lever is its senior editor, reporter, the exceptional journalist Andrew Perez, who played a lead role in exposing the single largest dark money political advocacy donation ever discovered in the history of our country. Congratulations to Andrew and the Lever, and I turn over the floor now to Andrew.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was far too kind. Thank you. Thank you. I'm Andrew Perez. I'm a senior editor and reporter at The Lever, which is a reader-supported investigative news organization focused on accountability journalism. I'm honored to accept the Izzy Award tonight on behalf of The Lever. Thank you to the Park Center for Independent Media for recognizing our work and what we're trying really hard to build. I've worked as a journalist for the past 9 years now, mostly at smaller news outlets. Like most of my colleagues and brethren in media, I have been laid off a few times, but I've managed to stay mostly employed by developing a beat covering money and influence on politics and policy. I've been fortunate to work for organizations that allowed and encouraged me to report stories challenging power, corporate interests, and politicians from both political parties, which is our mission every day now at The Lever. I first got to work with The Lever's founder in 2015, Izzy Award winner David Sirota, several years ago, working at International Business Times. And I was the first person to join David in 2020 when he started writing the newsletter that would ultimately become The Lever. The Park Center has spotlighted The Lever's reporting on dark money influence on the Supreme Court. And in 2017, I was a reporter at a campaign finance watchdog group, and one of my colleagues let me in on the world of Leonard Leo, a longtime executive at the Federalist Society and his dark money network, which is known as the Judicial Crisis Network. Soon after that, I went to the Federalist Society's annual lawyers convention in Washington. And between sessions, I pressed one of Leo's deputies for their dark money group's new tax return. And she was so mad that she went home and she blocked me on Twitter. But they did have to give me the file. And what it showed really astounded me. It showed that Leo's operation had raised more than $30 million in 2016, including $28.5 million from one donor. And that year, Leo's network, was leading a PR campaign supporting Senate Republicans who refused to hold a vote on Barack Obama's Supreme Court nominee, Merrick Garland. By this time now, Leo was serving as Donald Trump's judicial advisor, helping him select Supreme Court nominees, and his dark money network was helping boost those justices' confirmation campaigns with TV ads and donations, and lobbying the Supreme Court to issue conservative decisions and take up cases designed to smash precedents. He was working towards building a permanent conservative judiciary using a seemingly endless pool of secret money. And I wasn't alone in covering Leo's dark money operation, but it would be years before he really became a household name. And now people know Leonard Leo because he and his network have built the Supreme Court's conservative supermajority, a 6-3 supermajority, which last year overturned federal protections for abortion rights, invalidated gun control laws, and is gutting environmental regulations. They've accomplished all this while successfully hiding their donors. The public had no idea who was funding Leo's efforts for most of this time. But last year, our team at The Lever worked with ProPublica to expose the first known donor to Leo's network, and I'm pretty sure the largest too. A relatively unknown Chicago businessman, Barry Seid, effectively converted his entire electronics empire into a $1.6 billion donation to a trust run by Leonard Leo. Seid donated his company to the Marble Freedom Trust, led by Leo, which then sold the company for $1.6 billion. If Seid had sold the company himself, he would have owed $400 million in taxes, potentially. Instead, there were no taxes on the sale at all, creating, in effect, a giant public subsidy for a conservative advocacy and political project. There was no record that the trust even existed because trusts do not have to register publicly anywhere. And it was the largest dark money donation in US history, at least the largest known one. We were able to expose one of the most consequential stories in American politics, in my view, because small adversarial news outlets like The Lever face stories about dark money and corruption in our political and judicial systems. I've been proud to find that there is an audience hungry for this coverage. And we've seen this at The Lever, where we've built a small subscriber-funded newsroom that's punching well above its weight. With support from readers, we are competing with some of the biggest news outlets in media, and we're doing so without compromising. We are reporting the news how we believe it should be covered, reporting the news our way. In giving us the Izzy Award, the Park Center for Independent Media wrote that no news outlet is as thorough and relentless as The Lever in exposing the corrupting influence of corporate power on government and both major parties. That is far too kind of you guys to say that, but it is exactly what we are aspiring for every day. So thank you for reading and recognizing The Lever in our work, and thank you for letting me speak here today.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was wonderful. And certainly, I mean, the biggest, funneling of dark money. I mean, that's the story. And often you wouldn't find the corporate media covering that. Anyway, I will move on to our next winner. I would request Esther Kaplan to introduce the next winner. Esther is an editor at The Insider. She has previously worked as editor-at-large for Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, as a senior editor for The Nation, and many other accomplishments. She was one of our judges, and really delighted to have her at this ceremony. Thank you, Esther.
Thank you so much, Raza, and congratulations to all the honorees. It's been so moving to read all of this work. In only 3 years of existence, the nonprofit Mississippi Free Press has emerged as a formidable muckraking force whose reporting courageously exposes racial and economic inequities in the state of Mississippi. The women-run outlet led extensive coverage of the water crisis in Jackson when the city's water mains collapsed in the face of unusual freezing temperatures despite a $200 million investment in repairs. The series exposed a catastrophic failure of coordination among elected officials and intimately captured the impact on local families. One memorable passage read, "What does it mean to be without water? It is innumerable small humiliations, the splash of a toilet flushed with a bucket, days on end without a shower, no clean clothes. It is weeks without a cooked meal, a sink full of unclean dishes, brushing teeth with water from a bottle if a bottle can be found." Last year, the outlet obtained a tranche of emails between donors and University of Mississippi officials, rolling out a startling series that pulled back the curtain on how the university coddles a network of moneyed alumni, offering them outsized access and influence, all while tolerating their open expressions of racism. The Free Press has also worked to expand public access to open records, filing complaints with the State Ethics Commission to fight for access to state legislative caucus meetings when their reporters were denied access. Through fearless and deeply empathetic reporting, the Mississippi Free Press exposes racial and economic fault lines that go back centuries and continue to shape politics and power in the Mississippi of the 21st century. We are so pleased to honor the Mississippi Free Press with an Izzy Award. Accepting the honor this evening, our first editor, Donna Ladd, and then publisher, Kimberly Griffin. Or actually, I think Kimberly is going to go first, pardon me. I'll turn it to you, Kimberly.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-founder and CEO, Donna Ladd, I'd like to thank Park City for Independent Media, Ithaca College, and the judges for selecting the Mississippi Free Press as a 2023 Izzy Award recipient. This is indeed an honor. Since our launch in March 2020 as COVID hit, the Mississippi Free Press has been laser focused on reporting beyond headlines and partisanship, instead focusing on systemic issues affecting everyday Mississippians beyond the halls of power. For these remarks, I'd like to start where many remarks end. I want to take a moment to acknowledge Mississippi's most inclusive statewide newsroom, made of mostly Native Mississippians who often do thankless work that's not nearly as glamorous as the movies make it out to be. As we say in the South, I think I'm preaching to the choir. I'd like you to know that we've worked hard to ensure our team looks like Mississippi. What does that mean? It means our state has the largest African-American population and is home to the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians and so many different communities in between. Those are the communities we listen to and learn from. First, I'd like to thank our editorial team. Special shout out to our news editor, Ashton Pittman, who since 2020 has generated a significant portion of the journalism we're being honored for before being promoted to news editor this year. They don't tell the publisher much about what they're writing, but I do know that Ashton will be writing again, so please don't worry. Ashton, Asia Wiggins, Nate Schumann, Dustin Cardon, and Donna make up our incredible editors team. Next up is our equally incredible team of journalists and writers. Senior reporter Coyote Crown just finished covering the Mississippi legislature, which means he's exhausted. Infrastructure reporter Nick Juden, thank you, ProPublica, is likely still exhausted from last year. Aaliyah Veal, our culture reporter, along with our supersonic freelancer, Torshita Jackson, whom we recently hired full-time as our education equity reporter, thanks to Report for America, and soon our first bureau reporter, Heather Harrison, who is already attending meetings and brainstorming with us. Our creative director, Kristen Brenneman, who's currently on a much needed vacation and who knows all things, does all things. You should see the emails that have happened while she has gone. Bravo to our business manager, Jared Norton, who's been on the job less than 30 days and making our lives easier. He is a magical combination of preciseness and good cheer. Cheers to our executive assistant, Shay Smith, who frankly has the patience of a saint, and our director of giving, Kristen Hemmons, who also has the patience of a saint because she has to deal with me day in and day out. Special thanks to these freelancers who have the heart of full-time staffers, Courtney Marcure, Liam Pittman, Roger Amos, and Leo Carney. You are so vital to everything we do. Like Mississippi, our staff is remarkable. And just like Mississippi, their work is often overlooked, underestimated, and not appreciated. Thank you for seeing our team's hard work and dedication to Mississippi and the nation. And now here over to Donna.
So I'm like choked up over here after all this. But anyway, I'm so honored at this full team award, like Kimberly is saying. You may know that Kimberly and I worked together for 13 years at the Jackson Free Press, which was a fearless weekly newspaper modeled on Otten weeklies, but more inclusive than most, frankly. Those archives are now part of our nonprofit Mississippi Free Press, named in homage to a civil rights movement newspaper that Medgar Evers and a multiracial group had the courage to produce here in the 1960s. And his daughter was our first advisory board member. Most of our team He now first worked with us at the Jackson Free Press. We like to say that we have a combined 93 years experience doing honest journalism in Mississippi and being beaten up and smeared for it with anti-competitive practices by Gannett and others to this day. I squealed when I heard that we'd won the Izzy. I saw a documentary on I.F. Stone's journalism decades ago as I was choosing to do and create the kind of journalism that I was driven to do, which was more grassroots and truly inclusive, as well as really challenging to the media establishment and the old he said ways. Izzy Stone is one of my two top real journalism idols. The other is Ida B. Wells. I most appreciate that the judges seem to really get how our journalism is unique in Mississippi and much of the country. These judges' words gave me chills, and I will quote them repeatedly going forward. They said, MFP is, quote, fearless and empathetic, our fearless and empathetic reporting exposes racial and economic fault lines that go back centuries, vividly exposing how they shape politics and power in Mississippi in the 21st century. Y'all get us. That is exactly the shared vision of every member of the Mississippi Free Press, and we fully adopted, and I will be quoting it. I cut something and I had weird words. I will be quoting that repeatedly going forward because y'all get it. We call it systemic reporting. And this approach is core to every bit of work that the Izzy judges lifted up. The University of Mississippi email scandal and cover up by journalism faculty. Our water crisis work that finally directly named the racism afoot against Jackson and started a national media trend in talking about racism against Jackson, which nobody was really doing before that. And certainly the Black Women in COVID project that is indeed exposing those fault lines and intentionally embedded inequities in counties across our state since the violence of Reconstruction started it all, really. We call our approach Mapping Mississippi. I think that map flashed up there a few minutes ago. This summer, Tershita Jackson, the longtime educator we just hired, is leading our new education equity reporting project. We will go county by county, segregation academy by seg academy, as we tell the stories long hidden from Mississippi and America on the road to solutions through knowledge and truth. The project will go beyond schools into how white flight from the schools have destroyed full communities across the state of Mississippi. Just help us all, please, by passing the word on how we're innovating journalism in Mississippi, focusing on systems at the core of our reporting. Good journalism is about so much more than catching the bad guy. We want our journalism to help change the systems that lets that bad guy get away with it over and over and over again. We so appreciate all of you, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Donna. That is really, and I hope the students who are here would learn about systemic reporting. I mean, that is something, my great takeaway from your speech. And we'll move on to our next winner. I shall request our dear colleague, Patricia Rodriguez, who is an analyst currently at Earthworks in Washington, D.C. She used to be the former chair of the Department of Politics at Ithaca College. She's also on our judges panel. Over to you, Patricia.
Good evening, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be part of this and to see familiar faces. Liza Gross is a reporter for Inside Climate News based in Northern California. She's the author of the Science Writers Investigative Reporting Handbook and a contributor to the Science Writers Handbook. She has produced incredible reporting and nationally and globally recognized articles centered on environmental health and justice, with a focus on the misuse of science for private gain. Her work has been recognized by the Kavli Science Journalism Award and also many other associations. In the series for which she was nominated for this year's Izzy Awards, she wrote about a topic so often overlooked: the use of toxic wastewater from the oil and gas industry that does so much damage in terms of air quality, climate warming, and water and soil contamination. Her outstanding investigative reporting about people and local economies affected in a variety of ways is so timely, as are the revelations about how this damage is quite amply enabled and almost invited at nearly every level of regulatory agencies, food safety boards, and industry-influenced environmental consultants. The power of her work lies in delivering to readers a solid understanding of the ramifications of the oil and gas industry, and then the use of evidence based both on science and on the harsh realities of impacted populations, often those at the front line of demanding an end to natural resource extractivism and profit-making for the wealthy. Liza's reporting should empower us all to question industry's practices and local, state, and federal policymakers for the power imbalances and environmental harms that they perpetuate. Congratulations to Liza Gross and Inside Climate News and everyone who won an award.
Well, thank you so much, Patrizia, for that really kind introduction. And thank you to the Park Center and judges for recognizing my work. It's really an honor to share this award alongside reporters and outlets doing such really important work. And I'm truly humbled to receive an award honoring the legacy of I.F. Stone, fellow Pennsylvania native, actually, who famously said, bureaucracies put out so much that they cannot help letting the truth slip from time to time. And Stone's exhaustive critical reviews of all those materials bureaucracies put out unearthed information hiding in plain sight that undercut official claims. I think many of us rely on that approach, and I certainly did for these stories. When I first heard California regulators assure consumers that it's safe to eat crops grown with oil companies' wastewater, my first reaction was, really? I was really curious to see what evidence they used to decide it was a good idea for farmers who export pistachios and almonds around the world to use this wastewater. As it turned out, there was a massive amount of material to scrutinize, but amazingly little evidence to support regulators' claims. Instead, local water regulators seem to be deferring to the region's multi-billion-dollar industries, big oil and big ag. The heart of California's oil production occurs in Kern County in the Central Valley, about 130 miles north of LA. But all the easy to extract oil is gone, so it takes more and more water to get the really heavy crude out of the region's aging oil fields. And this produces massive volumes of wastewater called produced water. Kern County is also one of the richest agricultural regions in the world. And driving along county roads, you're likely to see pump jacks extracting oil alongside orchards and row crops. And there right now, California is struggling with the aftermath of a series of unprecedented storms and flooding. The state just went through the driest 2 decades in 1,200 years. So when Chevron offered its wastewater as an alternative source of water for farmers, a local irrigation district manager called it a win-win. So this practice has been going on since the mid-90s, but it kind of flew under the radar until about 2015, when rumors started, flowing about that farmers were growing crops with fracking wastewater. And regulators first tried to assure consumers that fracking wastewater can't be used for irrigation. Then they launched a big food safety project and hired what they called a neutral third party to study the safety of growing crops with this wastewater. The project went on for about 5 years, generating a tremendous amount of material, hours and hours of transcripts from public meetings, piles of documents and reports. And I analyzed all these materials along with all the scientific papers I could find on produced water. And the more I scrutinized the way the food safety project was configured and the evidence it produced, the more problems I found. For starters, the project was deeply compromised by conflicts of interest. The Food Safety Panel was not an independent science panel at all, but a stakeholder panel. It included people who represented the powerful almond board and had actually worked for the oil industry. So people with vested interests in the outcome of this project. And regulators' so-called neutral consulting firm, the firm, GSI Environmental, actually had a long history of working as a consultant and expert witness for the oil industry, including Chevron, the largest provider of produced water to farmers. An environmental advocate told the regulator in charge of the project that people with ties to the almond and oil industries could not provide unbiased scientific reviews of the evidence and should be removed immediately. Instead, the regulator said, "We think with diverse perspectives, we will get the best results." And when I asked the same regulator if he knew that this neutral consultant had essentially operated as an in-house product defense firm for the oil industry, he told me that it would have been almost impossible to find a consultant that did no work for oil companies, but had the expertise needed for this type of project. This, of course, was not true. But even worse, it showed that conflicts of interest were so pervasive, no one even gave them a second thought. And given this background, the project's conclusions were unsurprising. As one scientist told me, the way the studies were designed and the evidence they produced weren't sufficient to draw any conclusions about anything, let alone safety. Still, regulators told consumers they found no evidence of elevated health risks. And I discovered it didn't matter that regulators had banned the use of fracking wastewater for irrigation, because many of the same toxic chemicals are used in conventional and fracking operations and pose many of the same risks. Also troubling, regulators never considered the long list of health problems linked to living near oil and gas drilling, including the stress of having an industrial sounding drilling rig going 24/7 in your backyard. They considered that out of scope. It seemed incredible to me that California, a drought-prone state that presents itself as a climate leader, allows oil companies to use fresh water to extract the fossil fuels that exacerbate drought. And analyzing state records, we found that oil companies use hundreds of millions of gallons of high-quality water a year. We also found that this is likely a huge underestimate because the industry's water use records are filled with so many emissions and errors. Regulators basically have no idea how much fresh water the industry uses, even as the state asks people to cut their water use, and people in low-income communities and communities of color are running out of water. Fleshing out the problems in the way regulators decided it was safe to irrigate crops with the oil industry's wastewater, it was painstaking. It required wading through highly technical evidence and piles of documents. I am so grateful to the Park Center and the judges for recognizing this type of work. And I'm truly grateful to work at Inside Climate News, which puts a premium on accountability journalism. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Ann Marshall Chalmers, who contributed reporting, and Peter Aldis, an investigative data journalist who figured out how to make sense of the incredibly messy data kept by California's oil and gas regulators. I'd also like to thank my editor, Vernon Loeb, for giving me the time needed to do these stories and for pulling me out of the weeds that you inevitably get lost in when you go through this much material. I couldn't have done these stories without the help of experts who graciously answered all of my questions, but I'm perhaps most grateful to the people who trust me with their stories. They're so vital to helping citizens see how government's failures can have serious consequences on people's health and the environment. So again, thank you so much for this recognition.
Thank you so much, Liza. That was really remarkable. And what a hero you are. I mean, really fascinating and of course inspiring as well, for especially for our students and those who are entering into journalism, because there's so much of negativity about the profession these days that you hear and read. But you know, stories and outlets like Inside Climate News keep the flame going. Before I request our next judge to introduce the final winner, I do want to remind the students and other participants who are attending this ceremony, if you have a question, please use the Q&A section here. It's right at the center of your screen, if you can see it, or your phone. And we may have a few minutes at the end to address those questions. We have our winners here, so they can answer your questions or concerns. So I will now move on to Professor Victor Pickard, who is a professor of communications at University of Pennsylvania. But more than that, he is a renowned and celebrated author, a public intellectual, somebody who writes and comments on media, both in the US and abroad. And we are really grateful that he is part of our panel. He teaches media policy and political economy, both at University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg School for Communications. Over to you, Victor.
Thank you so much, Raza. It's such an honor to serve as a judge and have this opportunity to read so much great journalism. I want to congratulate all the award winners. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Carlos Ballesteros, who writes for Injustice Watch. Injustice Watch is a Chicago-based news organization, nonprofit, focuses on public service journalism, especially issues related to justice and equity in the court systems. And Carlos's dogged and deeply investigative reporting for Injustice Watch exposed the Chicago Police Department's arbitrary denials of U visas. And I think Carlos might mention more about U visas, but it's worth me mentioning simply that they're especially important because they confer legal status and a path to citizenship for undocumented victims of crime. Now, speaking for all the judges, I think it's safe to say that we were incredibly impressed with Carlos's trailblazing reporting because it does exactly what investigative journalism in the spirit of Eye of Stone is supposed to do. It uncovers systemic corruption, it inspires activism and social change, and sparks movement towards structural solutions. Carlos's in-depth stories drew attention to underreported and widely misunderstood abuses of immigration laws, leading to official investigations and policy changes that positively affected some of our most vulnerable communities. It's incredibly important work, and this award is very well deserved. Congratulations, Carlos.
Hey, everyone. Thanks again, and thank you, Victor, for those very kind words. I have a few slides which will break down the investigation that won me this very special award. But before that, I wanted to say thank you to my family, my friends, and loved ones for their time, patience, and guidance. I also want to give a special shout out to Sitlali, who's listening in from work right now on her headphones. Thank you for your feedback and your graciousness. I love you. Next, I'd like to thank my colleagues at Injustice Watch, especially my editor, Jonah Newman, for believing in me and for believing in the story. I'd also like to thank our newest editor, David Kidwell, who, unbeknownst to him, helped us restructure the story during his hiring interview. So thanks, David. And thank you, Injustice Watch. It's the best job I've ever had, hands down. And finally, I'd like to thank the Park Center for Independent Media, and thank you to the judges, Jeff, Victor, and Patricia, who donated their time to read through dozens of entries. And I'm very humbled by your words today. Okay, onto the story. Ari, could you please bring up the first slide? Thank you. It's not your fault if you've never heard of a U visa before. It's unfortunate that many people haven't. But just to give a quick breakdown of what it is, it's a type of legal status available to victims of qualifying crimes set by Congress who also cooperated with law enforcement in their investigation. In essence, the visa provides a path to citizenship for undocumented crime victims and their families who cooperated with police. And so that's the visa itself. Now, in order to get the visa, in order to get in line to apply for the visa, there's this very specific form that it's called the U visa certification. Now, that you need to have before you get in line. So what is that? It's a piece of paper signed by a law enforcement agency that's investigating the crime, which certifies the application, meaning it's the cops saying, yes, this person was a victim of a qualifying crime and they helped in the investigation of said crime. Now, if a victim does not get this certification from the police, they cannot apply for the actual visa. So this is the ticket to get in line for the visa. Next slide, please. So this is when I first came into contact about this story. I had known about U visas, very little about U visas before, but this lawyer, Shelby, who I followed on Twitter, tweeted this out, and she might have like 20 followers or something. And I happened to come across my screen, and she's asking like, are any other attorneys seeing a lot of these denials? What's going on? So I asked, more information, and she explained to me the process, and she showed to me what she was getting. She was getting all these denials from the police department for these certifications. So again, these are victims who said they were victims of who called the police, who cooperated in the investigation, who reported the crime, who were now getting denied by that same department for the legal status. And now this visa was created for immigrants to come forward and speak to the police, because obviously undocumented immigrants have many concerns about going to the government to report something. So this visa was created to create a safe pathway for them to do so. But as Shelby was saying, we were seeing a lot of these denials in Chicago. Next slide. So the story came out a few months later after that, and through public records and requests, I can't tell you how many FOIAs I filed. We were able to piece together what was going on. And what was going on is that the Chicago Police Department had denied more than 800 of these U visa applications over the last 2 years. That was more than New York, that was more than LA, even though those cities have a lot more undocumented immigrants living there. The experts we consulted to look over these denials, which we obtained through public records requests, told us that they were bullshit, told us that they were not in line with the law, told us that the reasons given for these denials were just not right. And we further investigated that the two cops who were signing most of these bad denials that we were looking at had almost been fired from the police department a few years prior because they had killed people while on duty and one off duty. And as well, and one of the cops had also essentially lied in his application to the police department and was recommended for firing, but it actually never happened. So these guys were taken off the street and put on this desk duty job of reviewing these U visa applications, and they were issuing all these denials for immigrant crime victims. Next slide. So after the story ran, we were very lucky and fortunate to show that a lot of the immigrants, some of the immigrants we spoke to who were denied, got their certifications from the Chicago Police Department. The Chicago Police Department said that it's reviewing a bunch of other denials that were potentially bad. I can't say how many of those have actually came through and fixed and have been fixed because I'm working on that right now, but safe to say there's still some that are not fixed. They also instituted new quality controls so that the denials can receive an extra layer of legal review before they're sent out. And the Attorney General's office here in Illinois opened an investigation into the Chicago Police Department's handling of this process. Last slide, please, Ari. And I'll take this last minute I have here to really kind of like highlight that while this is a problem in Chicago, there's a very nasty system in place that only allows 10,000 total of these visas to go out every year. So even if you get that ticket to get in line for the visa, you're still waiting 5, 6, 7 years for the application to go through, because we've created this like artificial limit to how many we can issue every year. And obviously USCIS is backlogged to hell. So there's a deeper problem here, a systemic issue, but thankfully through our story, we were able to maybe affect some positive change here on the ground. So yeah, I appreciate your time and thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. That was really, once again, inspirational journalism with impact, and for and some, reporting that actually changes people's lives and uncovers the kind of corruption and injustice that we've been talking about in the past 40 minutes or so. So we have a few minutes left before we end, and we have a couple of questions here. that have been posted. So the first one is for Donna or Kimberly, either of you can answer. What advice do you have for young writers and journalists wishing to pursue systemic reporting? How do you handle the often heavy content of this reporting? Donna, do you want to take a shot at first?
Yeah. Well, I think the last half of that, I think I'll deal with first, because it is very real, because this is a lot of, I spend a lot of time and some of our team buried in some very, very disturbing history, old congressional files on race violence. And we have a new race violence race massacre podcast series that we're developing with PRX. And this is tough content, and what I would say is we have to confront our history. And I think if we're white, I think we have a particular responsibility to do that. I would also give the advice that this kind of race violence that we're talking about happened across the country. And that's not known well enough as it should be. And so no matter where you are, that's the kind of work that you could really do. And a lot of times that race violence alone, and that's just a piece of this, right? But it's kind of my specialty. Race violence alone was used to embed inequities for generations, and not just in Mississippi and not just in the Deep South. And so these stories are everywhere. And I'm, beyond even the lynchings that a lot of people don't understand really happened outside the South. So I think my advice quickly is decide to do the work and put the time in. I mean, that's just the best advice I can give. Don't read it right before bedtime. I can't do this work right before going to sleep. And just be, like all of these journalists would say, just be willing to be brutally honest about it and ask yourself what those effects are going forward. And a lot of that's hidden in newspapers.com because they weren't shy about it over the years. So that's one of my favorite research tips, is that you can find it in their own words.
Thank you so much, Donna. I have another question which I'll address I'll request Kimberly to answer later. But let's go to another question by Marley Pelton, who's a student at Ithaca College, for Liza Gross. What is your response to the often negative commentary surrounding environmental reporting? What is your response to the brush away rhetoric that nothing can be done, quote unquote?
Nothing can be done. That's an interesting question, and something I've wrestled with quite a bit, actually. We're in such a polarized time. And, if you do sort of expose things that are problematic with policies, you get sort of accused of being woke and all this sort of thing. However, I really feel that you have to really think about who your audience is. And so I believe that there's a percentage of the population you're never going to reach no matter what you do. And so what I've been thinking about a lot is part of my audience includes policymakers who need to be doing a better job, policymakers who need to be held accountable. And so if I'm showing things that are clearly ridiculous, which it was actually the case with the regulator, who said that you couldn't find anybody who was unbiased to decide on, to review the science, which is that those studies would not have been published in a reputable journal. That's how bad the studies were. That should hopefully get them in a new position. So I think, just don't think about the people who are attacking you for being woke or for doing things that, they don't want to see. Just keep doing it.
Thank you, Liza. And we have another question from our friend and former colleague, Maura Stephens, who says her question is addressed to Carlos. Do you think your exposure of such police malfeasance has shamed any corporate employed journalistic outfits into watching police behavior more closely? And then she adds, she realizes that this may be a rhetorical question. Anyway, Carlos.
Yeah. I would hope so. I don't know. I mean, I think, generally speaking, I think our industry doesn't cover immigrant communities particularly well. I think our industry is obsessed with the border, with, you know, everything we see on CNN about immigration deals with like all the, you know, border stuff, and which are important stories, but the abuses that immigrants face every day, the exploitation, it's so apparent and it's rarely available. And I would hope that more newsrooms would pay attention to those issues. I think similarly to the last question, I think there is a sense of like, well, what can you do? You know, they're undocumented, they're supposed to be exploited, you know, or like, you know, why are you surprised? And I think that kind of like attitude towards it is pervasive. And I think I'm hoping that exposing these kind of injustices will hopefully get some more newsrooms to pay attention to these issues.
Thank you, Carlos. So I'll ask this question, you know, Kimberly, maybe you can address this. Has your reporting, whether on Jackson water crisis or on state legislature, caused backlash from governmental authorities?
I'm going to actually, Donna, finish this question because I really am not. I'm on the
Okay.
editorial side. I mean, I'm not on the editorial side. So if you want to ask me a business question, or if you want to learn how to fundraise, I'll give you my my email address. But you know, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit. So one of the things we like to say is usually everyone is mad at us about something. So I'll turn it over to Donna to give a more complete answer.
Right, Donna.
Well, what I'll say about the water crisis in particular, you know, around the time that Nick Juden first did that series that you guys were talking about, we've done a lot of work since then. I also wrote a column for NBC News Think that was taking the state leaders to task for being racist. And I just, you know, there was even a Sherman's March to the Sea reference. But anyway, and that when we went on national media and call them out, that's what pisses them off the most. And they were furious. And there was a whole campaign that I'll drop a link after this, but there was a whole campaign where these mailers about me are being mailed all over, you know, the wider parts of Jackson, and as well as Mayor Chokwe Lumumba. And but they get really pissed off about that when national media coverage started picking up our work, and then we're going on TV programs and that kind of thing, and just calling them out for just these very blatant things, which are still going on, like with 1020 and other things. So I think that answered the question, but I mean, there's always a backlash. Let me say this, there's going to be a backlash. And, you know, white men get really mad at white women for doing these things in addition to other people. So it's a whole other layer, and you just can't give a damn. That's my main advice. It's like, we're supposed to be journalists. I'm not running for homecoming queen. I'm not here. You know, Hazel Brennan Smith here said once, I ain't a lady. I'm a newspaper woman. And that's what the approach that we have to take to doing journalism. We have to tell the truth, and truth to power is exactly that. It is truth to power, and they're not all going to like us and be totally okay about that.
Thank you so much, Donna. That was a straight answer. Anyway, I have a question for Andrew, actually. And Andrew, because what you reported, and you, the Lever and ProPublica jointly, I mean, obviously it must have shaken up many a powerful quarter in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. So tell us about the response that your stories in 2022 garnered.
Yeah. I think our Leo reporting had a really positive reception, actually, and it got more coverage than I think I really expected. And actually, Democrats talked about it on the Senate floor. Joe Biden sort of talked about this largest dark money transfer in history, and they used it to try to push for passage of the Disclose Act. But it was sort of the same story we've seen in Washington all the time, where Democrats have really kind of talked this game about the scourge of dark money and then not really followed through, right? Like And that was, I mean, that was the case with everything we saw in the last few years in the Biden administration with, you know, with the filibuster in place, nothing really happens in the Senate, at least nothing, you know, no progress really gets made. And so, yeah, it was, you know, it's not going to change what we do, right? We're going to kind of keep exposing the problem, but you know, it is definitely up to other people to follow through on it and, you know, in power.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Well, there are more questions coming in, but we are just running out of time. So I think I would like this opportunity, you know, to thank you all for being here. And in particular, I would like to thank our colleagues at Ithaca College, Dean Amy Faulkner, who spoke earlier, Professor Ari Krisloff, who's our chief tech guru, who's produced this event, Professor Todd Shack, who is also an associate director at the center, and also a special note of gratitude for our judges who really had to read so many submissions over weeks and you know, make difficult choices, because it's always difficult to select the winners. And of course, Jeff Cohen, Esther Kaplan, Victor Picard, and Patricia Rodriguez, who is actually in Latin America at the moment and is joining from a hotel room. Thank you so much for being with us. She made it especially for this ceremony. Also, thanks are due to our colleague, Professor Patricia Zimmerman, who is also an editor at our web magazine, The Edge, and our, you know, colleagues Hannah Brooks and Jeremy Lovett, who made this ceremony possible and did lots and lots of hard work for weeks. Thank you all. And above all, our attendees, the students at Ithaca College, and our generous donor and supporter, Park Foundation and Adelaide Gomer, for their support, which keeps the PCIM going. With that, I thank you all again, and you can see our team at the end, and good night, and thanks for being here.